We are back on the Rational Boomer podcast. Hopefully, your day is going well. It is Thursday. It's been kind of a busy week. We had Old Soul on yesterday. Always great to hear from her. A lot of responses and emails. We'll be reading those in a moment. We've got some other guests coming up. Hopefully, Ed will be on tomorrow, but I haven't heard back from him yet. But trust me, I'm trying to set that up. We have another listener that you've never heard before, never been on the show. I suspect she'll be on Saturday, maybe, or Sunday. I'm not sure. Sunday, probably, maybe Monday. I don't know. Whenever I can connect with her on Zoom here, we'll have her on the show. And I'm looking forward to that as well. And again, I'll remind anybody that has an interest in being on the show, all you have to do is email me at rationalboomer@gmail.com. Tell me when you're available. We'll connect it up and we'll do the fucking show. I had an interesting conversation before I started doing the podcast. In fact, I may still be in the conversation. I have this very good friend who's in California. I've told you the stories about my time in the music business. His name is Stephen Ivory. He is a writer. He was a publisher of magazines back in the day, back in the 80s. And this guy is probably one of the most well-connected people in the music business that I've ever met. You see him on some documentaries from time to time. There's one out now that Nelson George put out, and Nelson and Stephen Ivory are friends, and he's in the documentary. He may even wrote part of it. But I've been talking to him off and on. He's not so much in the music business before, but I always tell him, I go, God, you're a personal guy. You have all these stories, you have all these contacts. You should do a podcast. And he always kind of blew me off before, but now he's thinking about it. So I'm trying to put him in the mode. I'm trying to convince him to come on this show because I think once you hear from him, you'll agree with me and he could use a little encouragement. Anyway, had a nice conversation with him. Hope to talk to him more. We do have some emails, and we should probably get to those right away. First one starts out, hi, Boomer. The soul episodes always leaves you thinking. Yeah, isn't it the truth? This time, for me, it was the mother of the young woman she's currently supporting, the mom who has to sneak away to check on her baby. Boomer, like you, I'm 30 years plus married to a wonderful woman. My wife is full of humor, resilience, and love, and 95% of the time she lets me walk around thinking I'm a big, tough guy. Sound familiar? Well, the first part, but allowing me to walk around acting like a tough guy, yeah, that's not happening here. But if I ever suggested that somehow put aside her mother's love for one of her babies, she'd take me down like a video of a cheetah grabbing a baby deer, which I wish TikTok would stop sending me, by the way. Yeah. Yeah. You don't screw with my wife's kids or grandkids. You do that, you're not going to wake up the next morning. And, I could never bring myself to be that guy either. So, but yeah, you don't fuck with a mama bear because they are dangerous. Trust me, I've been married 40 years and I know just how far I can go, but I don't ever step over the line because that would mean trouble for me. The email goes on. Can you imagine that this poor woman leads her whole life of subduing anything and everything just to yield to some idiot's bloviated beliefs? I can believe it. I had a father like that. How many other compromises has she had to make over the years? I hope those similarly situated women out there, many our age, Boomer, do that thing Soul mentioned of walking in with the red hat and quietly voting blue, just like that mother does when she has to sneak off to check on her baby. Good grief. Best, Garage Door Jeff. And as so often the case, Garage Door Jeff has a PS. He says, P.S. Even though you mentioned it yourself, it finally dawned on me how much your extensive radio experience helps to drive your success. In addition to your keen fashion sense. Yeah, you like this? Cheap shirt, t-shirt underneath, and a $3 hat. Yeah, I'm all about fashion. He says your knowledge of timing and cadence and what to include and what to leave out is honed. I wonder how many other radio men do podcasts now. I'm thinking not many because, well, they're all old. Well, there are some that do podcast. Um, Here's the problem. I'm not a big fan of people who worked in radio. I've always called them basically carnies with good voices. That's kind of who they are. Not all of them, of course. I have friends that are from the radio business, and some of them do podcast. Here's the mistake they make, though. They're so entrenched in this whole radio business thing. A lot of these people are really geeks about radio. And frankly, radio is a dying business. But what they try to do is do a podcast that emulates what they did in radio because they were so talented. And that's a mistake. I've always said if you want to hear a radio show, turn on the fucking radio. This is an opportunity, the podcast is an opportunity to improve on that. And when I say improving on that, I don't mean by making it slicker or how more highly produced. I mean going the other way. Make it more simple, less produced, and make it more intimate. Make it a conversation as opposed to these slick things we hear on radio. So, yeah, there's some radio guys out there. Some do a decent job, some don't. Ed's a former radio guy. He does a good job. But you're right about this, in terms of timing and cadence and such. That is a carryover from my time in radio. And the only way you learn that is by doing it over and over and over again. And as you know, I spent like 30 years in radio. So I always tell people if I'm not good at it by now, then there's something terribly wrong with my mental capacity. It's like anybody doing anything for a long time. They either get good at it or they quit fucking doing it. And I quit doing it, but then I said, I'm going to do it again, but a little different way with the podcast. All right. Thank you, Garage Door Jeff. Next one comes to us from Gussie. I appreciate Old Soul so much. So do I. How she has chosen to help is astonishing. Even though I'm not surprised by the attitude of the young lady's father, this is the same mindset that used the Bible to subjugate an entire race of people into slavery. Exactly what entity do they worship? I'm not a church going person, but I do remember that Satan is in the Bible also. Two different people can hear the same words, and one is appalled and the other becomes inspired. Her father might even report her. Gussie. That's what I was saying yesterday. Everybody's all concerned about sins. What's more sinful? This young woman to have an abortion to save her life, or a father that's willing to let her daughter die because of something he believes the Bible tells us? Frankly, I think he's the more guilty party in this situation. I really have a trouble with organized religion. And I know it's not all of them. And I know there's people out there that go to church and have good experiences with church. And I've always said it's a personal thing. If you are having success with whatever you're doing, then keep doing it. And I'm not going to fault you for it. I'm not going to tell you you shouldn't do it. My experience with organized religion is that they miss the point. They miss the point of not even what the Bible tells us, but what people of a normal, compassionate mind would do. I mean, at some point, you can take what's written in the Constitution, or you can take what's written in the Bible, or you can just do what's right. Do the right thing as opposed to misreading or perverting some document that somebody else wrote. I've said this before, many people I will talk to will say, well, I drink a lot, or I yell a lot, or I lose my temper a lot because my dad did. So naturally, I do it too. And I always say, well, that's well and good when you're under the age of 18. But once you become an adult, are you telling me you don't know the difference between right or wrong? Even if dad did all these wrong things all these years, that doesn't mean you have to do it. If you're of a reasonable mind, have some critical thinking skills, you can say, no, that's bad. I'm not going to do it anymore. So don't give me that bullshit excuse. I remember when I was a young kid, I used to think to myself, geez, when I get to be a father, I'll never do the things my father did. And I thought it would be hard not to do what my father did. But then when I got there, I realized I would never do that shit. That's fucking crazy. You have to be an asshole to do that stuff. So it wasn't that hard to make the choice to do the right thing, the best thing, the loving thing, as opposed to being an asshole. All right. Next one says, hi, I noticed that Trump is using other politicians' tactics as his own. Two notable ones are his statement, in the end, they're not coming after me, they're coming after you. I'm just standing in their way. I heard that first used by Matt Gaetz. I don't think Matt Gaetz is the first one to do it either. You know, it's a standard trick that I'm the victim. I need your help. And you help me because then you're just helping yourself, which is bullshit. It's a typical victim mentality that narcissists use. Email goes on and says, and his God made Trump video ad is so eerily similar to God fighter ad for DeSantis. Yeah, Donald Trump is not the most creative motherfucker in the world. He steals pretty much everything. He hears words and he just parrots words. He doesn't even know what the words mean, or it doesn't really matter to him. He just says whatever comes out of his mouth. I mean, he's at that stage now where he's flailing. He's not thinking about anything he says. He just talks. It wraps up, love your content and all your guests, M. And Em, I will tell you this, you added another section in that email. I'm not going to read it. Um, and you know why. And I'm not calling you out or saying anything negative about what he said. I just don't think there's a need to mention it here. That's between you and me. All right. Next one. Hello, Mike. As usual, I'm sparked to email after an old soul show. You might remember I've written to you a few times regarding my dad, his Republican views, and difficult time I was having with him. So you've heard the bad stuff, but in light of some of the topics discussed, let me share the other side of my dad. Seems like eons ago, I was 18, unmarried, and pregnant. First, my dad took me to his room to discuss the situation I was in and said the decision of how to handle it was mine. He did, however, want to present me with options, which a father should do. I could, of course, have an abortion, which I'm sure was difficult for him since he is Christian and not pro choice. Or I could give it up for adoption, or I could keep it, or I could keep it and have him and my mom raise the baby as theirs. I chose to keep it and raise the baby myself. That daughter is a beautiful, intelligent, successful young woman that is close to old soul's age and similar in beliefs. When I went to the hospital to have her, my parents took me. At that time, you were only allowed to have one support person with you. My mom was with me for the beginning. Then the hospital staff was so impressed by my parents' love and support, they broke the rules and let my dad come in. Then mom was in the delivery room with me and dad in the recovery room. My point is this: when I heard the story of that dad in Old Soul's story saying not to call unless his daughter was dead, I cried. Not just for the poor girl, but at how thankful I am for the wonderful parents I have. Despite my dad being a Republican and a Trump humper, he always supported and loved me. I agree with what you said. Religion seems to be the epicenter for all this intolerance. I know that's what started it with my dad. I could never cut him out of my life. That just isn't something I could live with. He's 85 now and mellowing out as he ages. He doesn't seem to be as in my face about his beliefs. I still hope he sees what an evil, lying piece of shit Trump is, but if not, he's still my dad. While I've cut friends from my life due to their beliefs, I could never do that with my dad. Besides, I have my therapy shows with you and Old Soul. As long as I can listen to you guys and email my thought, it's like therapy for me. Kind of like therapy for me, too. You all help me on a daily basis. So thank you. And as always, keep doing what you're doing. Hugs, Deb DZ. It's a nice story. And you know what? I think being a parent and now a grandparent, I can't understand why that duty, that responsibility doesn't trump anything the Bible, the Constitution, whatever says. I don't understand how you choose something else over your kids. There's never a time when you should choose things uh, over your kids. I can't imagine ever doing it. I can't imagine anybody with a reasonable mind doing it. It's a very nice story, Deb, and I'm happy to hear it. I mean, we all have different beliefs and such, but when it comes to your kids, they should be your priority. That's one thing I told my son. If you want your kid to grow up normal and a good kid, always make them the priority. Don't pawn them off on people to babysit them while you go out and party. The partying days are pretty much over when you have kids. The kids are the priority. If you don't have a lot of money and there's only so much food, well, the kids eat first. You deal with it after the fact. If you take that attitude and make the kids the priority, you will be paid in dividends. You know, I've had situations when my kids got older, even adults, and I've helped them out. And um, people will say, "Oh, you shouldn't do that." Well, first and foremost, I'm a father, now a grandfather and a husband. And if there's a problem with my kids, my grandkid, my wife, first thing I do is try to figure out what I can do to help and do it as quickly as I possibly can. That is my first job. And if you don't understand that that's your first job, well, then you're fucking doing it wrong. All right. The next one says, "Hey, Mike, I really enjoyed today's podcast with Old Soul. A recent story was very moving. I'm glad Old Soul is out there helping women with their needs. It's amazing. On a side note, I had to laugh about the pimp thing." Yeah, so did I. Donald Trump is such a fat old piece of shit, and Old Soul was right about him. He couldn't get any women ever. But I wanted to point out that his middle name is John, which that is exactly what he is, a John. He's a total piece of shit, and the only sex he has is seeking out pimps. I can't wait till Diaper Don ends up in prison. Have a great night, TJ. That's the funny thing about Old Soul. She's very sweet. She's very compassionate. She's very proper, which is totally the opposite of me. And well, I'm a little compassionate, but I'm not proper by any stretch of the imagination. But but the thing is, every time I talk to her, she comes out with some shit that surprises me, like making the pimp reference. If you saw the video, I go, "Whoa, what the hell was that?" Was not expecting that out of Old Soul. But nonetheless, she always gives us great information, and it's a great joy to have her on the show whenever I can get her on the show. Lately, it's been weekly, and we'd like to keep that up. And she's always more than willing to jump on when I ask her. And the goal is to have her on every week, and that's kind of the way it's worked out so far. So we're going to keep it going. All right. We had some interesting news today, actually, yesterday. Donald Trump, of course, was in court in New York in the Letitia James lawsuit against him, his company, and his family. Now, we'd heard that Donald Trump said that he wanted to um, give the closing arguments, or at least be involved in the closing arguments. And of course, um, Judge Engeron said okay, which was weird because in normal situations that wouldn't be allowed. Um, but anyway, as we talked about yesterday, Judge Engeron said, but there's going to be some rules. Got to have some fucking rules. He's a judge. It's his courtroom. It's his rules. So anyway, Donald Trump didn't respond to the deadline for the rules first time. Gave him another deadline, didn't respond. Gave him a third deadline and didn't respond. And so Judge Engeron basically said, okay, we're not doing it. If you can't agree to the rules, you're not doing that. But leave it to Donny Trump. He had to at least try to get the last word in. Now, he was barred from giving a formal closing argument. Donald Trump still got a brief chance to speak in court at the conclusion of his New York civil trial Thursday, calling the proceedings a fraud on me before the judge cut him off. He went on to say, "We have a situation where I'm an innocent man," the former president said. "I'm being persecuted by someone running for office, and I think you have to go outside the bounds." Now, after about 6 minutes, Judge Engeron, who had denied Trump's permission earlier to give the closing statement at the trial, cut him off and recessed for lunch. Now, the exchange took place hours after authorities responded to a bomb threat at the judge's house. And how do you think that came about? It's Donald Trump's whining and crying, and that's why he wanted to talk. He wanted to give a campaign speech. He wanted to call out the judge and Letitia James, and the judge knew he was going to do that, so that's why he barred him from giving the closing arguments without following some rules. So he sits at the defense table. He's looking very sullen and his eyes are down, pointed downward. And then all of a sudden he says, "You can listen to me for 1 minute." And he starts rattling it off. Now, a lot of people said, why did the judge let him do that? And why did Letitia James' group allow him to do that? Well, that's very interesting. Once he started, I mean, the immediate thought from a lot of folks was just shut him up, shut him down. But they didn't want to do that because Donald Trump is inevitably going to try to appeal this case, right? And this rant is going to be in the transcripts, it's going to be in the documentation. So if an appeals court is going to decide whether or not he can appeal the case, they're going to see this crazy part, and it's not going to work well for Donald Trump. It's just not going to work well. Now, again, over and above this, police had to check out the threat at Engeron's Long Island home, which came a day after he denied the former president's extraordinary request to deliver his own courtroom clothes. The proceedings were not delayed. Trump, the leading contender for the presidential nomination, has repeatedly disparaged Engeron, accusing him in social media post Wednesday night of working closely with the New York Attorney General to screw me. He went on to say, "At this moment, the judge is not letting me make the summation because I'll bring up things he doesn't want to hear," Trump said as he walked into the courtroom, characterizing the decision as political interference. And remember, I told you this is exactly what he would do. "I'm not going to follow the rules, so the judge says he can't do it." And then, of course, he comes in and he says, "Oh, the judge is stopping me from talking." It's all about performance with him. He wanted something to complain about, and this is what he had. I don't know that he would have stood up in a formal closing arguments or not, but that's what Donald Trump does. He throws out things that he knows aren't going to get approved, and then he bitches about it not being approved. Trump's lawyer said 44 days of trial, not one witness came into this courtroom, Your Honor, and said there was fraud. Trump lawyer Christopher Kise said contending his client should get a medal for his business acumen instead of punishment. He deemed the corporate death penalty. Now, at 5:30 a.m. on Thursday, hours before the trial's final day was to begin, Nassau County Police said they responded to a swatting incident at Engeron's Great Neck home. Nothing amiss was found at the location. It was just all bullshit. And you know, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing the swatting, the bomb threats, and nothing really comes out of it. These are just loser Trump-Levucks sitting on their bed making these calls because they're fucking cowards. Nothing ever comes of it. The only concern is that maybe there'll be one crazy fuck out there that actually does something, and that would be a tragedy. And I'm hoping against hope that doesn't happen. See, the interesting thing is, you know, as mad as Donald Trump is, and as much as he's trying to provoke Trump-Lefucks, how many of those motherfuckers showed up in court, in front of the courthouse, today or yesterday when Donald Trump was there? I give you a guess. Nobody. Nobody showed up. They're good at making phone calls and talking shit, but nobody's out backing Donald Trump anymore. Now, the false report came days after a fake emergency call reporting a shooting at the home of the judge in Trump's Washington, D.C. criminal case, Judge Chutkan. The incidents are among a recent spate of similar false reports at the homes of public officials. And this is something that's got to stop. It's just got to fucking stop. How in the world are we going to run a judicial system or a political system when every time somebody doesn't like something, they make these crazy threats? Now, I don't think Judge Engeron is slowed by this. Judge Chutkan's not slowed by it, and neither is Jack Smith. But if ever somebody finds that this works on the lower levels, you're going to see more and more people doing this. And this is not optimal for our judicial system. We need to find these fucks and punish them in an expeditious and decisive way. And they need to pay a serious price. Now, you would think that there would be ways they can track this down, the FBI or whoever. Let's hope they do that. And let's hope that they nail these dumb motherfuckers. You remember the woman that made a call and left a voicemail message to Judge Chutkan threatening her? Well, they caught that stupid bitch. Let's hope they catch these clowns and stop this bullshit. Now, after taking the bench a few minutes late, Engeron made no mention of the incident at his home. On Wednesday, Engeron had nixed an unusual plan by Trump to deliver his own closing remarks, but that was because of Trump, not because of Engeron. The fact of the matter is that Engeron gave him some preferential treatment by even considering Donald Trump having the opportunity to give the closing arguments. He did lay out some rules. He didn't lay out any rules that were any different for anybody else, any witness or anybody else giving closing arguments. Those are the same rules the lawyers would have to follow. So it wasn't special or more severe rules for Donald Trump. It was what everybody gets, but Donald Trump couldn't do it. So then he shows up and tries to game the system. He's sitting there in the defendant's table. I don't know if he's trying to intimidate the judge. That's not going to work. Trying to intimidate Letitia James. I got to tell you, every time I see the camera go by Letitia James, she looks like a Cheshire cat, smiling her ass off. Now, Letitia James wants the judge to impose $370 million in penalties. Over and above that, they want to ban Donald Trump for life for doing business in New York. And they want to ban his family for 5 years for doing business in New York. Now, think about this. The one person making the decision is Judge Engeron. And Donald Trump has been going after him like a bulldog. Do you think Judge Engeron is going to be happy with this dumb motherfucker? He said something too. I heard one of the media outlets talk about this. He said to one of the prosecutors after the trial was over, he said, "How do you think this compares to Bernie Madoff's case?" And the prosecutor said, "Well, it's a lot smaller, but similar ideology." And the reporter was kind of taken aback by that. Judge Engeron's got Bernie Madoff in mind. Bernie Madoff basically got life in prison, and billions of dollars were siphoned off his business, if any was left. That was a horrific case. But the fact that Judge Engeron is making that comparison in his mind might tell us that he ain't going to be fucking around when he comes up with a decision in the next week or two. And that's what he said. He said he would deliberate on this and he should have an answer by the end of the month. So we're looking at 2 weeks max, maybe a little more than 2 weeks. But we'll see what happens when it ultimately comes down. The bottom line is it's not going to be good news for Donald Trump. Everything Donald Trump did with this case was absolutely wrong. He never helped himself. He thought he was. He never helped himself. He didn't allow his lawyers to help him at all. And he's going to get taken down. Now, I'm getting a lot of people saying to me, okay, yeah, but he'll just appeal it and he'll drag it out forever and never pay. Well, that's not exactly true because he just doesn't get to appeal it and put everything on hold until the appeal is done. He can't drag it out forever. And mainly because it'll be interesting to see if he's in a position to even appeal it. Because in order to appeal it, he's going to have to post a bond. He may not have to post the whole amount, but he'll have to post a bond. Think about this. If the decision is 370 million, a lot of people think it's going to be higher than that. But if it's 370 million dollars and they only want 10% of it, he's going to have to come up with $37 million. People say he's a billionaire, shouldn't be a problem. Do you really think Donald Trump has $37 million in liquid cash that he can get his hands on legally? I doubt it. Or what if the bond is 20%? Now we're talking about $74 million, making it even tougher. Donald Trump can't appeal it. He can drag it on forever, but he's going to have to go into those pockets and come up with cash. And Donald Trump isn't a guy with a lot of cash flow at this point. So what's going to happen if he has to come up with this bond, and he will, he's going to have to liquidate some shit, depending on what it is. And of course, in the appeal, he'll lose the appeal because that's all he does is lose appeals. He might delay losing all his money, but they're going to take a pretty good chunk out of him. Now, the interesting thing is, well, what are they going to make him pay in terms of a bond? Well, you know who makes that decision? Judge Engeron, the same guy that Donald Trump has spent the last few months pissing off. So this will be interesting to see what the final decision is and what the bond is. And then we'll see Donald Trump scrambling, selling NFTs or pieces of his fucking diaper to make any money he can to make this appeal. But if he can't come up with the money, he can't make the fucking appeal. All right. We are going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Well, on Tuesday, Hunter Biden was in Washington, D.C., making fools of Republicans. But yesterday, he was in California. President Joe Biden's son pleaded not guilty Thursday to federal tax charges filed after the collapse of a plea deal that could have spared him the spectacle of a criminal trial during the 2024 campaign. Of course, the Republicans, the Trump-fucks, weren't going to allow that, even though they had no evidence of Hunter being connected to Joe Biden in terms of business. They still have to push this thing. Hunter Biden could have pled out. This could have been done, but the Republicans put pressure on. Not sure exactly how they did that, but they did. Now Hunter Biden is going through this bullshit. I've got to believe that at some point when this is all said and done, Hunter Biden's going to be suing some Republican motherfuckers. And he's probably going to win. Now, Hunter Biden was accused of 9 felony and misdemeanor tax offenses. The charges stem from what federal prosecutors say was a 4-year scheme to skip out on paying the $1.4 million he owed to the IRS and instead use the money to fund an extravagant lifestyle that, by his own admission, included drugs and alcohol. Now, the judge said, "We're here today because you've been accused by the United States of a criminal offense." And then he entered the not guilty plea. The judge set a tentative trial date for June 20th during the half-hour-long hearing. Meanwhile, Hunter Biden has also been charged in Delaware with lying in October 2018 on a federal form for gun purchasers when he swore he wasn't using or addicted to illegal drugs. He was addicted to crack cocaine at the time. He's also accused of possessing the gun illegally, has pled not guilty in that case as well. Now, the exact accusations all come from a years-long federal investigation into Hunter Biden's tax and business dealings that had been expected to wind down over the summer with a plea deal in which he would have gotten 2 years probation after pleading guilty to misdemeanor tax charges. He also would have avoided prosecution on the gun if he stayed out of trouble. Now, that's the deal most anybody would have gotten under those circumstances. Because remember, the money he owed the IRS, he's already paid back. If he evaded $1.4 million in taxes, that's a lot of money. I'll grant you that. And what he did was illegal, but he did pay the money back. Want to bet Donald Trump's never paid the IRS any money back he owes them? Anyway, the Republicans wanted to make this a big deal because they're hoping against hope that it somehow ties into Joe Biden so they have something to scream about in the 2024 election. But the fact of the matter is, there is no connection, there is no evidence. So Hunter Biden's going through this bullshit, something more difficult than the average person would go through simply because his name is Biden. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Hunter Biden shouldn't be punished, but he shouldn't be punished worse than any other person going through the same circumstances. Um, Hunter Biden, for all intents and purposes, back when he was doing drugs, he was a fuck up. He did some stupid stuff. He was addicted to drugs. And I don't give him a pass because he was addicted to drugs for all his crimes, if there were any crimes. But I say, let's not crucify this guy just because you want to get his dad, especially when his dad had nothing to do with it and you have no proof to show otherwise. The deal unraveled when a federal judge who had been expected to approve the deal instead began to question it. Now, the tax and gun cases are moving ahead as part of an unprecedented confluence of political and legal drama. As the 2024 election draws closer, the Justice Department is actively prosecuting both the president's son and Donald Trump, the Republican frontrunner. You see, that's the mindset here. Well, if you're going to prosecute Donald Trump, we're going to prosecute Hunter Biden, and then it's even, right? That's how the Republicans always do that. That's why they want to impeach Joe Biden, because they're afraid they're going to say, the Democrats are going to say, well, don't vote for Donald Trump because he was impeached twice. Well, they want to be able to say, yeah, well, Joe Biden was impeached too. Only problem is you can't impeach somebody over nothing. And to suggest that Donald Trump didn't commit any misdemeanors or high crimes when he was impeached is absolutely ridiculous because there's mountains of fucking evidence. Now, Hunter Biden's original proposed plea deal with prosecutors had been pilloried as a sweetheart deal by Republicans, including Trump. To be honest with you, they wouldn't even go after Hunter Biden if Trump wasn't behind it, if Trump didn't want it done. Now, of course, Donald Trump has his own criminal problems, just a few problems, 91 felony charges across 4 separate cases, including that he plotted to overturn the results of the 2020 election, which he lost to Biden, a Democrat. He too appeared in court Thursday for the closing arguments of the civil trial that we just talked about. Now, Hunter Biden's attorney, Abby Lowell, referenced the failed deal to the judge on Thursday, suggesting that there had been congressional interference. Lowell had previously accused special counsel David Weiss of bowing to Republican pressure. And that's exactly what happened, because he made one deal, then he backed out of that deal and did what the Republicans wanted him to do. David Weiss needs to be looked at, this whole procedure for pulling a deal and offering something more harsh at the behest of the Republican Party. Abby Lowell went on to say, we had a resolution of this case in the summer of 2023, and then things happened. Weiss told the judge there was no need for additional hearings on the failed deal. Please fall apart all the time, Weiss said. Hunter Biden's criminal proceedings are also happening in parallel. So far, unsuccessful efforts by congressional Republicans to link his business dealings to his father. Every time they're asked, what's the evidence? Do you have evidence? They'll say, I hope so. I think so. I got to be honest, if you're looking to impeach somebody, you better have something better than, I think so. I hope so. But that's all they've got. And that's why they look so foolish every time they try to do something. In an interview that aired Thursday on MSNBC's Morning Joe, First Lady Jill Biden said she thought the GOP's treatment of her son was cruel. I'm really proud of how Hunter has rebuilt his life after addiction. You know, I love my son, she said, and it hurts my grandchildren. And that's what I'm so concerned about, that it's affecting their lives as well. But do you think the Republicans care about that? No, fuck no. Now, if he's convicted of the tax charges, Hunter Biden, 53, could receive a maximum of 17 years in prison. Following the collapse of the plea deal, Attorney General Merrick Garland appointed a special counsel to handle the matter. The special counsel is tapped to handle cases in which the Justice Department perceives itself as having a conflict, or where it's deemed to be in the public interest to have someone outside the government step in. Yeah, this whole thing has been very dirty. And again, I'm not saying that Hunter doesn't deserve to be punished. He was a fuck up. He was an addict and he committed some crimes. But he's done all he could to try to rectify it. First and foremost, paying back the money he owed to the IRS. I'll guarantee you there's some Republicans sitting in Congress right now that still owe the IRS money for whatever crazy bullshit they've done or any negligence they've committed. All right. Now, this next story is interesting. I was given this heads up by a normal emailer, a regular emailer, Grandma Patty. You've heard me talk about her. I read an email from her recently. And she sent me this email and a link to the story. And why this story is very interesting is because it's a story that Old Soul brought up. You remember the story about this young woman who became pregnant. She tried to get help and nobody helped her. She ended up having a premature birth in a toilet. And then they were trying to take this young woman and charge her with what was the charge? Something with a corpse. You know, it was just they were trying to make a an example of her. And she's just this young woman who tried to get help, couldn't get help, and things didn't go right. Well, Grandma Patty sent me this article, and it's great news. I sent it to Old Soul, and she's jacked about it. An Ohio woman facing a criminal charge for her handling of a home miscarriage will not be charged, a grand jury decided on Thursday. She was waiting out this charge, and now we find out the grand jury has decided Thursday that she will not be charged. The Trumbull County Prosecutor's Office said grand jurors declined to return an indictment for abuse of a corpse against Brittany Watts, 34, of Warren, resolving a case that had sparked national attention for its implications of a pregnant woman as states across the country hash out the new laws. A municipal judge found probable cause to bind over Watts's case. That was after the city prosecutor said she miscarried, flushed, and scooped out of the toilet, and then left the house, leaving the 22-week-old fetus lodged in the pipes. Her attorney told Judge Watts had no criminal record and was being demonized for something that goes on every day. An autopsy determined the fetus died in utero and identified no recent injuries. Now, Watts had visited Mercy Health St. Joseph Hospital, a Catholic facility in a working class city of Warren, about 60 miles southeast of Cleveland. And she went there twice in the days leading up to her miscarriage. Her doctor had told her she was carrying a non viable fetus and to have her labor induced or risk significant risk of death, according to the records of her case. Now, due to the delays and other complications, her attorney said she left each time without being treated. After she miscarried, she tried to go to a hair appointment, but friends sent her to a hospital. A nurse called 911 to report a previously pregnant patient had returned reporting the babies in her backyard in a bucket. That call launched a police investigation that led to the eventual charge against Watts. Warren Assistant Prosecutor Louis Guarnari told Municipal Court Judge Terry Ivanchuk the issue wasn't how the child died when the child died, but the fact that the baby was put in a toilet, was large enough to clog up the toilet, left in the toilet, and she went on with her day. Well, according to Old Soul, that story's not quite so raw. But the bottom line is, here's a woman, a young woman who's pregnant, needs help, and because of the politics in that state, she could not get help. She was left to her own devices, and what is she supposed to do? The fetus wasn't viable. She wasn't being treated, and that put her in a horrible position. So now we're supposed to put this woman in jail because medical care failed her. The government of Ohio failed her. That's just a fucked up story. And I am glad to hear that she will not be prosecuted. And I know Old Soul is pretty excited about it too. So that's good to hear. And thank you to Grandma Patty for sending that to me. Now, let's get back to Donald Trump. When the decision comes down that he's going to have to pay out a lot of money, he's not going to have the cash to do it, even if it's just a 10% bond. $37.5 million is a lot of money. And Donny isn't known to have a lot of cash. He generally has a lot of debt. So he's going to have to pay that bond, whatever it may be, but he's going to need to get cash. And one of the things I've said before is that in order to get the cash, he may have to sell some shit off, which is not something he's going to like to do. And I'm suspecting most of his properties are pretty heavily leveraged, so there isn't a lot of equity in them, or not full equity anyway. So even if he's got a $50 million building to sell off, that doesn't mean he has $50 million worth of equity. Probably far less than that. So he's going to have to sell off more properties in order to pay off this bond, let alone the actual fine. Now, a longtime investigative reporter noticed a key moment in the final arguments in the New York fraud trial against Donald Trump. Trump's lack of liquidity was cited as a possible motive for his grossly inflating his wealth. Like I said, cash poor, because that's how Donny does it. Now, she said the argument has been that he submitted these statements of financial condition in order to get better rates at the bank, she said. And they went through some of the spending that Donald Trump has been doing recently. There have been a lot of renovations at 3 properties. He put $250 million into Doral and the old post office. He spent $225 million on renovations. What the prosecutor said is that Trump was in a cash crunch, and that is why he needed to inflate his wealth, which would have fallen below a certain point that would have cost him more or would have removed the possibility of being able to get capital from banks. He had to be looking more financially healthy than he in fact was. And secondly, She goes on to say, secondly, I was listening to it because he's facing coming into a judgment with this judge of penalties going up to $370 million. We're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars. The attorney general painted the picture that the cash position is not good. It also supports the analysis that we have done at the New York Times that he doesn't have a lot of cash on hand to meet a penalty of that size. It means, she explained, that Trump will be in a position where he'll have to sell off some of his properties. He will face the humiliation of being a giant in the New York real estate world and falling so far. As I've told you before, somebody who is a narcissist, it's all about how he looks, people's perception of him. Rich, powerful, has a lot of properties. But when he has to start peeling off properties and losing cash and having no cash flow, Donald Trump isn't the Donald Trump he claims to be. Now, former senior Robert Mueller prosecutor Andrew Weissman explained that while there's no crime of being cheap, if it's motive for you to put down something false, then it is. He also noted Craig's point about Trump being forced to sell his assets could be even more undignified because there has been a financial monitor appointed to handle the Trump organization finances from the point at which fraud was determined. The monitor may seize the assets to sell them off in kind of a fire sale. Very often, courts of appeals will require a cash bond, said Weissman. And so that issue of can he wait until the appeal is over to start paying this? Probably not an option. Now, as I said, Donald Trump was in court yesterday. He had an impromptu little speech, a campaign speech, if you will, and a rant against the judge and Letitia James. Donald Trump left the court on Thursday to deliver a press conference during the closing statements of his trial. And among his allegations were that Michael Cohen withdrew his testimony given in the New York fraud case. Now, speaking to Cohen Thursday evening, he made it clear, I recanted nothing. What Donald Trump was saying was an absolute lie. And even if he did, there's so much hanging over his head, it wouldn't matter. The only ones who made that pronouncement were Donald and his legal team, which was rebuked. Honig wasn't the only one to call the statement a complete, Ellie Honig, another legal analyst. He wasn't the only one to call the statement a complete mischaracterization of the trial. The New York Post performed the fact check in the headline of its article. Cohen testified at the end of October 2023 when he made it clear that Trump tasked him with twisting the numbers. I was asked by Mr. Trump to increase the total assets based on a number that Trump arbitrarily elected. Cohen testified, according to the Messenger's Adam Glassfield, typing a transcript. And my responsibility, along with Alan Weisselberg, predominantly was to reverse engineer the various asset classes and increase those assets to achieve the number that Mr. Trump asked. Now, Trump's attorney, Chris Keiss, asked Cohen, yes or no, if Trump directly ordered him to fraudulently report the numbers. Cohen said no, clarifying that Trump never gives direct orders like that. He compared Trump to a mafia boss who makes vague demands without directly asking for them. The issue that Trump likes to confuse is that Cohen confessed that he lied to a judge, William H. Pauley, when he pleaded guilty in 2018. Cohen never committed the crimes he pleaded guilty to. Speaking to him Thursday, Cohen cited a 2021 book by Judge Jed Rakoff, senior United States District Judge in the Southern District. The book, Why the Innocent Plead Guilty and the Guilty Go Free, and Other Paradoxes of Our Broken Legal System. It outlines how so many people end up pleading guilty to crimes they've never committed. Now, Cohen said there's a distinction between this in the case of Donald Trump and these specific questions asked of me at trial, said Cohen. A distinction should be made between Donald's explicit or implicit task demand. We knew what he wanted based on the conversations. Donald acknowledged that what we had done by signing off on the document. So what he's saying is he didn't tell him directly, but he did what he believed Donald Trump was inferring him to do. And then Donald Trump basically confessed to it by signing off and saying, yeah, that's good. Trump admitted on the stand that his were final eyes on the financial documents. Donald Trump Jr. admitted on the stand that he signed fraudulent financial documents. So Donald Trump can do whatever he wants to do to try to talk his way out of this, but it's not going to help. As I've said before, Donald Trump, if he's talking, he's lying. If he's talking, he's implicating himself. If he's talking, he's fucking himself over like he does every damn time. That's who Donald Trump is. So now we're going to sit and wait for a couple of weeks, maybe quicker than that. But there's a lot of stuff going on for Donald Trump coming up. He is going to be going to trial on January 16th regarding the E. Jean Carroll case for the second defamation of character case there. And in between these two cases, he's already defamed her again a couple of times. So there could be another case down the road. The interesting thing is the Iowa caucus starts on January 15th. We're still waiting to hear if what the appeals court is going to say regarding his absolute immunity. The prosecution was asking that they come up with a decision within 5 days of it being ended, and that was on January 11th. So that would put it at January 16th. So it's going to be very interesting. Donald Trump's going to have a busy couple of weeks here because it's all going to come down crashing on his head. And when that's done, there's still more coming. That's what I've said before about Donald Trump. There's no way that a man of 78, not in the best health mentally or physically, you can see it when you see him on TV. This man does not look good, and he's too old to be going through this shit. But with all this hanging over his head, something's going to happen. He's going to get sick. He's going to emotionally break down. He's going to get put in jail. Something is going to happen. That's why I feel so convinced that Donald Trump is not going to be the nominee. I just don't see it. And I can't tell you exactly what it's going to be, but it's not going to be good. It's not going to work. And it was interesting when Donald Trump was in court, you can tell he was getting a little pissed off at Judge Engeron. And that's because Donald Trump likes to control everything. That's what a narcissist loves to do. And Judge Engeron was not having it. There was one point where, and it wasn't yesterday, it was before that, but we know that Melania Trump's mother died. And Donald Trump and his legal team said, we need some time because his mother-in-law died. Judge Engeron was not having it. He actually hit the desk and said, no, we're not delaying anymore. We've delayed this enough. We're not doing this anymore. I know what you're doing, and it's going to fucking stop. Now, of course, he didn't say it like that, but you know what I mean. Now, not long after closing arguments began in the $370 million fraud case, Judge Engeron felt compelled to step in and cut off Trump's attorney, Christopher Kise, who boasted his client is considered a real estate industry expert. Now, according to CNN's Paula Reed, Engeron cut the lawyer off and corrected him. Chris Kise is presenting his closing arguments, she reported before adding, for the first time we heard the judge stop him and correct him. It was over whether former President Trump is an industry expert. Kise reminded the court as part of his closing argument, I'm reading notes that Trump is a, quote, industry expert. Trump has been part of the fabric of commercial real estate in this state and around the world. I know where this is going. The judge stopped him and said, Trump has not been qualified as an expert. When you bring an expert, they have to be qualified, she continued. Turning to CNN host John Berman, um, the judge stopped him, corrected him. Things like this, John, get under Trump's skin. Trump is sitting there because this case is so personal. This is about everything he sold himself to be. It's likely this exchange did not please Case's client, Donald Trump. And that's what I mean. Anytime you can embarrass Donald Trump or expose him for the fraud that he is, that drives him nuts. That's probably even worse than being found guilty of a felony. When you have him sitting there in front of the press, in front of a court, and you say, no, sir, you're not an expert. You're not qualified as an expert. You're just a guy who's on fucking trial here. Donald Trump, in his heart of hearts, thinks he's the greatest real estate mogul in the history of the world. That's what he believes. But if you look at his taxes, if you look at his behavior, you know he's nothing more than a grifting fraud. I don't know that he understands that, but now it's being presented to him, and he has no way to talk around it. And that's what gets under his skin. He's always been able to bully his way out of things. He's always been able to divert, distract, or do something to get out from under the microscope so he can deny that what they're saying. But now he's in a situation where he can't deny it. He has no proof to deny it. And he has a judge who has the ultimate control. This is where Donald Trump failed when he went into government. When he was in business, he was the guy on top of the mountain who made all the choices, made all the decisions. Everybody had to bow to him because he was the boss. But the moment he got into government, he was not the top dog anymore. There was always somebody he had to answer to. I mean, while he was president, he tried not to have to answer to people, but he had Congress and he had the law and all those sorts of things. I mean, remember, he wanted to put Jeffrey Clark in as AG, and the Attorney General's office and the DOJ said, if you do that, we're all quitting. And he knew that would make him look very criminal, and he didn't do it. So Donald Trump is outside his realm. He doesn't have the power. He can't make all the decisions. He's got to answer to somebody. And now it's even worse because he's not president. He's sitting in a courtroom. He is a defendant, and the judge is going to tell him what to do. And that was, when he stepped up and he gave his little 5-minute speech that he shouldn't have given, that was him trying to be rebellious, saying, see, that'll teach you a lesson. Well, Judge Engeron didn't learn a lesson from that. He just became annoyed. And again, it goes back to what I've said before. There's one person making the decision as to how much Donald Trump will have to pay, what kind of bond he's going to be required, and how this is all going to take place. That one man has the opportunity to make it so that Donald Trump can never do business in New York again. So Donald Trump, by pissing him off, this is not the smartest move. But this is the only move that Donald Trump knows. Be the bully, try to scare people into submission. Well, Judge Engeron, you can call in a bomb threat to his house. You can ridicule him in his courtroom, but that ain't going to get him anywhere. Judge Engeron is going to do what he's going to do, and it's going to be absolutely devastating to Donald Trump when it comes down. All right, we are going to wrap up the Rational Boomer podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen. I hope you have a great day, and we will talk to you again tomorrow.